She spent hours preparing the Christmas table, her late husband's favorite dishes, candles flickering gently against the frosted window. But as she sat alone staring at the door, no one came. Not her son. Not his wife. Just silence. That's when she realized she wasn't just forgotten. She was abandoned. But in her deepest grief, she would soon discover a secret her late husband left behind. One that would change everything. Helen Bradford stared at the flickering candles, their golden glow dancing across the table she had so carefully prepared. The aroma of roasted turkey, cinnamon-spiced sweet potatoes, and buttery rolls hung in the air. But the silence was louder than any cheer she had hoped to hear that night. The house felt cold despite the heater's soft hum. It was her first Christmas without Randall. For 50 years, they had shared the holiday like clockwork, laughing, bickering over the right way to hang tinsel, and always ending the night with 2 glasses of mulled wine by the fire. Now his chair sat empty, a hollow echo of all those shared seasons. Helen had hoped her son Michael and his wife Claire would come this year. She had called 2 weeks ago, her voice trembling slightly. "Michael, it would mean so much to me if you both came for Christmas dinner. The house feels too quiet without your father." There had been a pause on the other end. "We'll see, Mom," Michael had said flatly. "Claire's parents invited us too." But Helen had clung to that "we'll see" like a lifeline. Surely, her only child wouldn't leave her alone. The clock chimed 6. She glanced at her phone, no messages. The turkey was growing cold, and the candles had nearly burned themselves out. Then, a buzz from the countertop broke the heavy quiet. Helen snatched the phone, hope flaring for a moment. It was a text. "Sorry, Helen. Spending Christmas at my parents'. Maybe next year. No Merry Christmas." No explanation. Just that. Helen's hand trembled as she set the phone down. Her lips pressed tight, holding back the tears threatening to spill. It wasn't about the meal. It wasn't even about Christmas. It was about being seen, about mattering to someone. She had poured her heart into raising Michael, sacrificing nights of sleep, working extra hours when he needed braces or tuition. Now, she couldn't even get a phone call. As the minutes stretched on, Helen's shoulders sagged. She picked up Randall's old wine glass and poured herself a generous serving of red. "Merry Christmas, Randy," she whispered to the empty room, her voice cracking. Later that night, Helen found herself drifting toward Randall's study. She hadn't stepped foot in there since the funeral. The scent of his cologne still lingered faintly among the books and papers. She brushed her fingers across his desk when something caught her eye, a small drawer she didn't remember seeing before. It had a tiny brass lock. Randall's keys still hung on a hook by the door. With trembling hands, she tried each one until the lock clicked open. Inside lay an envelope marked, "To Helen. Open only if you're alone." Helen stared at the words, her heart pounding. Slowly, she opened it. "My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And I'm sorry for leaving you to face the world alone. But I couldn't leave without giving you a sanctuary. There's a farmhouse in Willow Creek. I bought it in your name and set up a private trust that no one, not even Michael, can touch. You've given your whole life to others. It's time you put yourself first. Go there when you're ready. The key is in this envelope. Inside that house is everything you'll need to start over, if you choose to. I hope you never feel as alone as you do right now, my love. You deserve more. Always yours, Randall." Helen read the letter twice, her eyes filling until she could barely see. A farmhouse? A trust in her name? Why hadn't he told her? And why would he warn her about Michael? She thought back to the last year of Randall's life, the faraway looks, the moments he seemed burdened by something unsaid. Was this it? For the first time in months, Helen felt something spark deep within her chest. Not joy. Not yet. But purpose. Tomorrow, she would find out what her husband had done. Helen woke early the next morning, the letter and key resting on her nightstand like relics from another life. For hours, she stared at the ceiling, Randall's words echoing in her mind. "It's time you put yourself first." But how? How did one rebuild a life from ashes at 72? She thought of Michael's text last night, cold, dismissive, and a flicker of something unexpected flared in her chest. Was it anger? Or perhaps resolve? Helen swung her legs out of bed and rose slowly. The decision was made. She would go. She packed a small bag, A few clothes, her worn leather journal, and a framed photo of Randall in his favorite cardigan, smiling at her with that boyish grin even after all those years. The drive to Willow Creek took 2 hours. Snow flurries danced across the windshield as the landscape shifted from suburban streets to open fields and winding roads flanked by evergreens. Her GPS announced, "You've arrived at your destination." Helen stopped the car at the end of a gravel driveway. The farmhouse stood before her like something out of a memory. 2 stories of weathered white siding, green shutters, and a porch that wrapped around like an embrace. She stepped out into the crisp air, clutching the brass key tightly. "What have you done, Randall?" she whispered. The key fit perfectly into the lock. With a soft click, the door swung open. Inside, the house was warm, cozy. A fire crackled in the hearth as though it had been waiting for her. A knitted throw blanket was draped over a rocking chair. On the kitchen counter sat a basket of preserves and a folded note. Helen unfolded it with trembling hands. "Welcome home, my love. I knew you'd find your way here. This house is yours, a place no one can take from you. Explore every room. You'll find little pieces of us everywhere. Love, Randall." Her breath caught. She wandered from room to room, each one filled with familiar touches. Randall's favorite armchair by a sunny window, her old teacup set displayed in the cabinet, family photos hung with care. In the master bedroom, a cedar chest sat at the foot of the bed. Helen lifted the lid to find a collection of letters bound with twine and a journal labeled, "For Helen's eyes only." She pressed the journal to her chest, tears spilling freely. But as she sat on the bed, her phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Hey, Mom. Can we talk soon? I've been meaning to ask. Do you need help managing Dad's estate? I could get power of attorney set up to make things easier." Helen stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Randall's warning, "Not even Michael," suddenly felt sharper. Helen sat in the farmhouse kitchen as snow fell gently outside, swirling like tiny stars against the frosted windows. The leather journal lay open before her, Randall's neat handwriting filling the pages. "I can't tell Helen about Michael. Not yet. She loves him too deeply. But I've seen the way he's been looking at our finances. The day I overheard him talking to Claire about what's left for them was the day I knew I needed to act. If I don't protect her now, I fear she'll lose everything after I'm gone." Helen pressed her hand to her mouth, her chest tightening. Michael. Her Michael. Was this the same boy she had rocked to sleep, bandaged scraped knees for, and stayed up nights tutoring through algebra? Her phone vibrated again. "Mom, you didn't answer me earlier. It's important we get paperwork sorted. I can take care of everything. You just need to sign a few forms." Helen stared at the message. Her fingers itched to reply, to demand answers, but her heart faltered. Instead, she called Della Walker, her closest friend of 20 years. "Helen, are you okay?" Della's warm voice felt like a balm. "I need your help," Helen whispered. "Can you meet me at Willow Creek? It's about Randall. And Michael." Della arrived the next morning, her sturdy boots crunching over the snow. A practical woman with a sharp mind and a heart as wide as the sky, she embraced Helen tightly before stepping into the farmhouse. As Helen recounted everything, the letter, the trust, Randall's journal, Della's eyes hardened. "That boy is circling like a vulture, Helen. I've seen this happen to too many women in your position. You need to get legal advice before you lose control." "But he's my son." Helen's voice cracked. "And you're his mother. You don't owe him your life savings." By noon, Della had called her cousin, a retired attorney, and arranged for Helen to meet him. Together, they reviewed Randall's trust documents and confirmed what Helen feared. Michael had attempted to forge a signature on Helen's old power of attorney forms 2 months after Randall's passing. "He's trying to gain control over your assets," the attorney said gravely. "But Randall was smart. This trust keeps everything in your name and out of his reach." Helen felt anger rise like fire in her chest. "I gave him everything I had for years. And this is what he does." That evening, as Helen sat staring at the fireplace, her phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, we need to talk. Why didn't you tell me about this farmhouse? I deserve to know what's in Dad's estate. It's partly mine." Helen closed her eyes. "It's not yours, Michael. Your father made sure of that." A long silence. Then Michael's voice turned cold. "You'll regret this, Mom." Helen's hand trembled as she ended the call. Helen stood by the farmhouse window, watching the snow blanket the fields in silence. It had been 2 days since Michael's cold warning. "You'll regret this, Mom." She hadn't answered his calls since. But now, as headlights swept across the driveway, her stomach twisted into a knot. "He's here," she whispered. Della placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to let him in if you're not ready." But Helen shook her head. "No, it's time." Michael strode up the porch steps with Claire following close behind. Both were bundled in expensive coats, their faces tight with annoyance rather than concern. "Mom, why haven't you been answering?" Michael demanded as Helen opened the door. "Because I needed time to think," Helen said softly but firmly. "We drove 2 hours to get here," Claire added sharply. "You could have had the decency to explain what's going on." Helen gestured for them to sit in the living room. "I found Dad's letters. And the trust." Michael's jaw tightened. "That trust was a mistake. You can't manage all this alone. Just sign over power of attorney and let us handle it." "No." The word surprised even Helen. It was small, quiet, but it felt like steel. "This house, this trust, your father left them for me. Not for you. And I will not give you control." Michael's voice rose. "Mom, you're being unreasonable. You're too old to handle these things. Claire and I are family. We're just trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Helen's voice shook, but her eyes were steady. "Or control me?" Claire crossed her arms. "You don't know what you're doing, Helen. You're going to ruin everything." Della stepped forward. "That's enough. Helen is perfectly capable of making her own decisions." Michael's glare shifted between Helen and Della. "So this is what it's come to. You'd rather listen to outsiders than your own son." Helen's lips quivered, but she drew a deep breath. "You stopped being my son the moment you saw me as a burden instead of a mother." The silence that followed felt heavier than any snowfall. Michael turned on his heel. "Don't expect us to come running when you realize how much you need us." "I don't need you, Michael," Helen said softly. "I need peace." As the door slammed behind them, Helen felt her knees weaken. Della caught her, holding her steady. "You did it," Della whispered. "You stood up for yourself." Helen let out a shaky breath. "For the first time in my life, I feel free." That night, Helen lit candles in the farmhouse's living room. One for Randall, one for herself, and one for the life she was beginning to rebuild. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of it. Snowflakes swirled outside the farmhouse windows, sparkling in the glow of string lights Helen and Della had hung around the porch. Inside, the house felt alive, warmth radiating from the fireplace, the scent of cinnamon and roasted apples filling the air. Helen stood in the kitchen, wearing her maroon sweater and pearl-like earrings, her hands busy shaping dough for bread rolls. For once, her movements weren't heavy with loneliness. She glanced at the clock. Guests would be arriving soon. It had been 2 weeks since Michael stormed out of the farmhouse. Helen hadn't heard from him since, and for the first time, she didn't feel crushed by the silence. Randall's words echoed in her heart. "It's time you put yourself first." Helen had spent her entire life giving, her time, her love, her energy. Now she was learning to receive. The first knock on the door startled her. "Helen, we brought pie," came Della's cheerful voice as she stepped in, followed by her husband Thomas, carrying a basket of baked goods. Behind them were neighbors Helen had only just met. Mrs. Carter from down the road, her grandson Jack, and even Maria from the small bakery in town. "Merry Christmas, Helen," Maria said warmly, handing her a bundle of fresh bread. Helen's heart swelled. They gathered around the farmhouse table, the same table that had been so painfully empty just weeks ago. Laughter filled the air, mixing with the crackle of the fire and the clinking of glasses. Helen looked around, her eyes misty. These weren't blood relatives, but they were present. They cared, and that mattered more than she'd ever realized. Later that evening, Helen excused herself and stepped out onto the porch. The sky stretched above her in deep velvet, stars glittering like promises. She thought of Randall, his steady hands, his gentle voice. "You saved me, Randy," she whispered. "You gave me the chance to live again." Her tears came, but they felt different now, not heavy with grief but light with gratitude. When she turned back to the farmhouse, warm light spilled from the windows and voices called her name. She smiled. For the first time in years, Helen felt like she was home.